Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Trade Block, our Discord show. I am Ryan Wormeli, joined as I am every month by Pat Fitzmaurice. Fitz, how are you doing here? First day of July.
I know, man. Doesn't it seem like we're pretty much at the starting blocks for the football season? Like, I always feel like things go really fast after the 4th of July. Like, draft season is upon us in no time. So these next 6-7 weeks are just going to fly.
Yeah, 4th of July is kind of the milestone marker of, okay, you're really in it now. I feel like it doesn't really escalate until like there's a difference to me between like the second half of August and like the second half of July, but it is all still draft season. Like, you are in it now. Scott Fish Bowl drafts are happening. You know, people are still talking Dynasty. Obviously, that's what we're here to do. It is very much into the just thinking about fantasy season for everybody, not just the Dynasty managers.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, no, not just Dynasty, redraft, pretty much everything. You know, Dynasty, you've had your draft and everything, and it's sort of a holding pattern or whatever. But, I mean, you definitely have to start staying attuned to NFL news because it is going to start flying at us really quickly at the end of the month.
Well, and don't hand wave away, you know, that the dynasty drafts that still are going on, because there are still startups that are happening. There are people out there. True. I get questions every now and then for people in their rookie drafts still, even here in late, you know, it was late June, now getting into early July. So just because the bulk of it come in May doesn't mean that's all of them. So that's why we're still rocking and rolling with this show, of course.
I just answered one in Discord. Someone was debating between Jalen Milroe and Alec Iamaner. So, you know, tough one for me. Two guys I really like. Yeah, there are startups going on, no question. It is still a pretty busy time for Dynasty.
Yeah, and you get a lot more information now than you had in May, just kind of seeing some of those early reports and just more time to think about it. So interesting to wait on those. Let's dive in. We're going to do what we always do, which is react to the latest update to our Dynasty trade value chart, which did drop earlier today because it is July 1st. So this is, of course, the July update. We update this every single month, all year long, off-season, in-season, doesn't matter. This is getting updated the first of every month throughout the calendar year. So we're going to run through, kind of react to some names that stand out to us, guys that moved up, moved down, guys that didn't move but we thought should have, just kind of general reactions to the update here. And then in the second half of the show, as always, we'll dive into the audience questions. Those can be chats that are written in here. They can also, of course, be guys who are raising their hand to come up on the stage. We'll take those as well in the second half of the show. Fitz, let's start where we always do at quarterback. And I was kind of messaging you earlier, you know, just kind of gauge where you wanted this conversation to go, because this time of year, there aren't the most updates, right? There's only so much that can really happen, you know, in June to make us evaluate these players, especially these veterans that we already really know who they are, differently. I did want to highlight one, I think, kind of major change, which is not individual to one specific quarterback, but to the position as a whole. There were huge drops in value in our Superflex value. So if you look at the chart, you can see trade value, you can see Superflex value in the quarterback section, of course, which is going to be more because they're worth way more in Superflex. And then you can see the change. And if you look at kind of where the changes were made, some of these quarterbacks went up in one QB value. The guys at the top, actually, Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, their numerical value rose 3 to 5 points in one QB. But it dropped in Superflex, and it wasn't just them that dropped in Superflex. Everybody did. They dropped, you know, Lamar Jackson dropped 5 points. Jane Daniels dropped 8. If you get further down, Herbert dropped 17. Stroud dropped 17. Everybody across the board dropped value in Superflex. What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, we've been tinkering with the quarterback position a lot, and this was maybe kind of an overdue overhaul of the positional values. So quarterback in one QB versus Superflex, obviously hugely important in Superflex. The laws of supply and demand are just so different. And so we had, you know, pumped up the Superflex values to the point where I think they were a little overjuiced. And we wanted to sort of bring them back into line with the realities of the market. So the reductions were a little less for the guys at the top, Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, And then we kind of docked the mid-tier guys a little bit more just to bring them down because, yeah, Superflex is important, but so are the studs at the non-quarterback positions. The guys like, obviously, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, those types, but also like, the Achans and the Ashton Genty and, Drake London and those guys. And we thought maybe we should not have some of the mid-tier quarterbacks. I don't know. Didn't think it was sound to have like Trevor Lawrence maybe be more valuable than Drake London. Like a little bit of a rethink on that, or Baker Mayfield more valuable than Drake London. Like heads up, Worm, who would you rather have in a super flex league, Baker Mayfield or Drake London? Let's say you had 3 starting quarterbacks, and I don't know. I mean, so that's the thing. You always want 3, and I guess that's going to matter in the calculus. But I don't know. I personally think Drake London is more valuable overall than Baker Mayfield, even in Superflex. And,
well, let me ask you this then, Fitz. Is your intent, and I know this is a collaborative effort, but is your intent when kind of addressing these values to reflect the reality of making trades in dynasty leagues, or is it to reflect your kind of mathematical or otherwise analysis on how it should be approached? Because I think the case you're laying out for lowering, and in some cases lowering significantly, the superflex values of these quarterbacks makes a lot of sense. Like, I think you're right. Like, in a vacuum, assuming you're set at the other positions, it was set well enough at the other positions, I do think somebody like Drake London I'd rather have than Baker Mayfield. But in practice, in reality, when I am trying to execute trades in any Superflex Dynasty league I have ever been in, it is darn near impossible to acquire quarterbacks, and there is always a premium even over what kind of in a vacuum the value would look like. So the way we kind of had it before, where the Superflex values were maybe a little bit supercharged, is probably more reflective of the way trading actually gets done, just in my experience. Maybe that's anecdotal, Fitz. I'm curious what your experience is. But for me, it really does feel like there is such a premium to get them that making it more correct is maybe less accurate to how you can actually execute these trades in your real leagues. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I hear you, and it is kind of a push-pull on that, and sometimes it is like really like pulling teeth to try to get a quarterback from someone via trade. But just as far as the realities of the market, I think with our adjustment, we are a little closer to that. I think we did have the super flex values juiced a little too much. And just, I'm kind of glad you brought this up, Worm, as like a high-level objective for the trade value chart. Like on one hand, I think our first priority is to come up with values that do reflect the realities of what people, our listeners and viewers, are finding out in the dynasty streets as far as like what it takes to acquire player X. Will trading player Y and player Z be enough for trader? Like, we want the values to be pretty much in line with like what it takes to pull off trades. But at the same time, we also want to give it a little bit of our own spin and maybe give a little more value to the guys that Debro and Erickson and I collectively like a lot. Drake May, for instance, a guy Erickson and I both really love and have been, honking our horns for some time. And maybe like deflating just a little bit some of the guys we're not quite as high on. But like, we don't want to trash guys. Like, really, you can look at that philosophically, what is a player's value, and part of it is what he does and how many points he produces, but part of it is like market value, and perception is as important as reality in dynasty. So we want both things to factor in, of course, and get accurate values as much as possible. But yeah, we do want to put a little bit of our own spin on it, so that the guys we think are going to return maybe more value than the market overall believes. We want to give those guys a little bit of extra juice, but not do it in such a way that, you're going to use our value chart and take trade offers to people, and they're going to look at you like you have a third eye growing out of your forehead. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like
Yeah,
we want everything to be realistic, but maybe just a little extra dash of spice for the guys we like, and maybe a slight deflation of the guys we're not as into.
I think there should be a balance of kind of those two approaches when thinking about it. First of all, when you're talking about people here at Fantasy Pros who are very high on Drake May, I want you to start including my name, because I have been very much on that train with you from the beginning, especially in our regular Dynasty show with you, me, and Bogman. We've been singing those praises for a while now.
Erickson came to mind because he's a Patriots fan,
which is fair.
And it's not just a product of his fandom either, though. He has realistically been pretty high on May from the get-go.
I want to ask you if there's a specific name that you really want to highlight. We can dive into it. There weren't any that really stood out to me as guys that moved so much that I wanted to talk about them, which is why I'm kind of, for the quarterback position, taking the more higher level approach. I did want to quickly ask, and we've touched on this point before in the past, but now that we've made this big change with the Superflex values, I thought it was interesting to note that some of these players moved a lot more proportionally in Superflex than they did in 1QB. And in fact, some of them might have gone up in value in 1QB and down in Superflex. And I wondered if you could speak to your approach for trying to determine quarterback value between the two, and the types of players that you see as, I want to be higher on them in 1QB versus lower on Superflex. Who are the types of quarterbacks that it really changes your calculation personally when you're trying to put together these values?
Like, we want to adequately reflect the market in 1QB, which the difference makers at the position are still pretty valuable relative to other non-quarterbacks, guys who can move the needle. Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, typically the guys who run. To a lesser extent, Joe Burrow, who's a just phenomenal pocket passer. Jalen Hurts, obviously, with what he does as a runner. And then that's kind of it. I mean, Patrick Mahomes has been, low-level starter caliber. Like, we feel like those five guys make a big difference for you. And we didn't quite, I think we kept Jalen Hurts 1QB value pretty much the same, but we gave a little boost to Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow. And because those guys are coveted, even in 1QB. But then beyond that, I mean, guys are pretty fungible, just because of the laws of supply and demand. And it's different in Dynasty than it is in redraft. Like, I think there's more supply of quarterbacks in 1QB Dynasty than there is in 1QB redraft, simply because, like, youth is an advantage in 1QB Dynasty. So whereas you might have just no interest in having Michael Penix Jr., Cam Ward on your team in a 1QB redraft league, you might be really interested in having those guys at least as backups on your 1QB Dynasty team, because they might have greater future value.
By now, most of you have probably heard of Reality Sports Online, the powerful fantasy sports platform where owners get to build and manage their fantasy team like an NFL general manager. But the question is, have you tried it? It's time to go see what all the buzz in the Dynasty community is about. Free agency, multi-year contracts, a rookie draft, multi-team trades, franchise tags, contract extensions, first-round rookie options, automated contract and salary cap functionality, and much, much more. Think it sounds complicated? It's not. The best thing about Reality Sports Online Fantasy Front Office is that it doesn't take any more time than a standard league. It just requires more strategy. Think you're among the fantasy elite? Well, this is the platform to test your mettle. Still not sure? You can test out your general manager skills for free in a mock free agency auction. If you like what you see, use promo code FANTASYPROS to receive a 10% discount on your team or league today. That's promo code FANTASYPROS to receive a 10% discount on your team or league today. Fantasy just got real at realitysportsonline.com. All right, Fitz, normally we go to running backs next. I want to go to the tight ends next because there's been a lot of news actually happening in the tight end position. We're getting some questions about tight ends already in the chat, and I just want to kind of address that position maybe earlier than we normally would because of really two pieces of news that have come in the last couple of days. One of them is, of course, the major trade between Pittsburgh and Miami. But the other came earlier today, and that's one I want to start with. Darren Waller. We had some conversations kind of behind the scenes in our Fantasy Pros Slack channels about, and I say we, I mean the analyst team, about Darren Waller and this trade to Miami, who now, of course, has this vacancy because Jonnu Smith is gone. It's a really wide open tight end depth chart, and Jonnu Smith just had this breakout year. So it's easy from those two, data points to paint the case of being very excited about Darren Waller. It's also very easy to paint the case against him, given the age, how long it's been since his last successful season, the fact that he was retired and is coming out of retirement. Our friend Scott Pianowski likes to say, like, once the cheese has gone bad, it usually doesn't get unbad. I'm butchering that phrase, but that essential sentiment is what he goes for. That kind of seems like it might apply to Darren Waller here, right? Once the cheese has gone bad, it's not coming back.
Absolutely correct. His last really good season was in 2020. Like that 5 years ago. Doesn't this have a Josh Gordon type feel to you, Worm? Like where people continue to chase. I guess this has been Darren Waller out of sight, out of mind for a little while, but people continue to chase Josh Gordon long after he had turned in his last really productive season, because the highs of that last really good season for Josh Gordon were so high that people kept chasing the dragon there and thought they might get another one. I plugged Darren Waller into my Dynasty rankings this morning. I put him at tight end 68, and our chart only covers about 46 players. So, he would not move the needle at all. He turns 33 right at the start of the 2025 NFL season. Hasn't given us any sort of difference-making production for a long time. And, I'm pretty skeptical he's going to be a difference maker in 2025.
If you're in a tight end premium format, though, which a lot of Dynasty leagues are you at least like putting in a very small fab, just trying to get him with a bid? Looking at some of these names that we have on the chart, I know you said you have him in the 60s, so clearly he's lower than these names. But like, if I'm a win now team and it's tight end premium and it's a position of need for me, and I guess the way I would phrase it like this, and I know I'm kind of stumbling around, I would put it like this. There is very likely going to be somebody on the back end of your roster, unless you're in a pretty shallow Dynasty format, there's very likely some wide receiver or running back at the back end of your roster that you're going to be cutting a year from now anyway, and it's just a lottery ticket. So if you're in tight end premium, given that there is this wide open room in the depth chart and he has been a good tight end at some point in the past, what's to say that's not a worthwhile lottery ticket as opposed to some other lottery ticket that probably they're all probably not going to hit, but in the right format, could you make the case? Even comparing to other tight ends, like if you're a win now team, do you really care about like Thomas Fidone or Gavin Bartholomew? I'm looking, these are some of the names we have on the chart. Those are not needle movers either.
No. So, and, I think it would be folly to assume that Darren Waller is going to have any value beyond 2025. So it's basically what you think he could do for you in 2025. And I know when I plugged him into my redraft rankings, I put him at tight end 40. We just did a Fantasy Pros football show with more of a, our regular show with more of a redraft angle with Joe Dolan of Fantasy Points. He said the Fantasy Points crew has Darren Waller projected at tight end 33 for this season. And they actually juiced that up. He originally came in right around tight end 40, and they added a little to it. So, could that maybe make him worth rostering in tight end premium? Sure. I guess he is going to get bid on. There will be fab bids, I think, even in non-tight end premium leagues. Do I think it's worth it in a non-tight end premium league? No. Do I in a tight end premium league? Yeah, I'd maybe throw a few bucks at him if your tight end situation was pretty bad, if you don't have already like two good ones. But think about it, Worm. Even on Miami, where is he going to rank in the target pecking order? At best, fourth, behind Tyreek Hill, Jaden Waddle, and Devon Achane. Possibly lower than that if Malik Washington or Nick Westbrook-Akine have any sort of impact as the third wide receiver.
I am on a very, very much like deep into a rebuild in one of my leagues that is tight end premium. I have Trey McBride and nobody else at tight end. Literally, like, no, I mean, I have other names, but they're like basically all not playable. So it's one of those things where the fab resets at the start of the year. So like I have 2 months to spend it or lose it. So I am putting in a bid for him in that format because if you're to win now, obviously you can kind of try and paint the case if you believe he could do something this year. And then if you're not win now, but if you're in just upside, like ideally he has a hot month and I can sell him for like a 4th round rookie pick, right? Like just get something better than nothing is kind of the approach. I mean, theoretically it could be higher than that, right? If he really does hit in a way that we don't expect, but tight end premium, I'm going for him. The trade that opened up this spot for him though, I want to ask you about too. Jonnu Smith obviously goes to Pittsburgh, reuniting with Arthur Smith to the delight of social media managers everywhere, coming up with their funniest, bits and memes, reacting to the news of that. We have Jonnu Smith. Let me check here. 22nd in the Dynasty trade value chart, and he's just a hair of value behind Pat Freiermuth. Jonnu is a 22 value. Freiermuth is a 23 value. They are tight end 20 and tight end tied for 21, respectively. How are you approaching both of those guys in your Dynasty leagues after this trade?
I think the trade value chart pretty accurately reflects like what my approach is with those guys. So I think they could have some value because Arthur Smith does tend to tight ends are pretty heavily involved in his passing game, and there's not a lot of firepower at wide receiver for the Steelers beyond DK Metcalf. But obviously those guys are going to kneecap each other to some degree, and I think that kind of takes them. It keeps them from having tight end 1 upside in the here and now. So I don't know. I think these rankings are pretty accurate, and if anything, I might be inclined to maybe have Jonnu ranked a little lower than this, maybe like behind Brenton Strange, who at least is a young guy who is currently his team's tight end 1.
One other tight end note I just want to highlight. You guys finally listen to me every month. I feel like I come on here and say the gap between Brock Bowers and everybody else isn't wide enough. We finally widened it a bit. In tight end premium, He is now 20 points higher than McBride, which actually might even be I love McBride, so that is kind of stunning to look at, but I find it hard to argue. He's also now 15 points of value ahead of McBride in just a regular format, not even tight end premium. But I think the big thing is that in tight end premium, he is now valued as higher than every receiver except Jefferson and Chase, and he's valued as higher than every running back. To me, that is correct. Like he would be, if you strictly based off the value that we have on this chart in a superflex tight end premium format, there would be 6 quarterbacks and 2 receivers, and then he would be the pick. And I think that's more appropriate than where he was ranked previously.
I agree. And, even though for Bowers, tight end premium really only, even for Bowers, who derives so much of his value, or did last year anyway, from catch volume, reception volume, the gain in tight end premium is about 22%. I think it was for Brock Bowers. So I just want to make sure people do not make the mistake of thinking that tight end premium boosts a tight end's value by 1.5, by 150%. That's not how it goes, because tight ends get rewarded for 3 things: for receptions, for yardage, and for touchdowns. Tight end premium only bumps them for the receptions. So it is not a 1.5 multiplier for tight ends. It's right around 20% for most guys, a little higher than that for Bowers.
I want to highlight some questions we have in the chat before we get to the other positions in the trade value chart, just because they are tight end related. So Bunting asks, he says, I had essentially zero faith in a repeat big year out of Jonnu, but drug my feet on dealing him. Now he's stuck with Jonnu, Freiermuth, and Hawkinson in a non-tight end premium league. Do we think this move is an upgrade? I feel like there's no way to upgrade from the targets he had last year in the attempts to preserve Tua. You kind of already hit on that, Fitz, in terms of where you talked about him in the rankings. But do you see Jonnu essentially as a hold, or would you sell low on him, which is what Bunting asks?
No, I'd just hold Bunting. So I think people will see it as a complete gutting of Jonnu's value, and I don't think that's necessarily the case because there's so little at wide receiver for the Steelers. But it is pretty hard to spin it in a positive way. And, yeah, I mean, I kind of think that no matter what, Jonnu was in for some sort of value decrease because I don't know. I don't see Miami continuing on with Tua Tagovailoa averaging 5.7 intended air yards per throw. Like with this ultra short passing game Miami was using last year, when 2 years ago, Tua's average air yards per throw was 9.5 yards. Going from 9.5 to 5.7, that is like an entirely different looking offense. And obviously it was part of the Tua preservation program after he came back from his concussion last year. That spiked the pass catching value of Devon Achane and Jonnu Smith. And, you know, I think they're going to at least try to restore some of the verticality in that offense this year. So no matter what, Jonnu's value is going to drop a little bit. And now I think it drops maybe a little bit more than we were anticipating with the move to Pittsburgh.
Needs more cowbell. Asks us about Darren Waller. We already hit on. He also asked us about another tight end, Mason Taylor, who we have 15th in this trade value chart amongst tight ends. Numerical value of 28 in regular formats, and then tight end premium numerical value of 34. He asks, in a rookie draft, is the 205 too early to take Mason Taylor? This is in tight end premium. He's wondering whether he trades back and risks it. He's tight end needy. His starter is currently Tyler Higbee in a tight end premium format, but he'd be passing up guys like Higgins, Harris, or Besh in that range. What do you think, Fitz?
I'm cool with it in tight end premium. I think that's about where he should go. Would you agree, Worm? I mean, a guy who, granted, like he did not put up eye-popping numbers at LSU, but, you know, considering where the Jets drafted Mason Taylor and how little else they have on the depth chart at tight end, there should be immediate opportunity there. So, like, I like it. I think that's a good spot for him. And given his neediness at tight end, yeah, I think he's a fine pick at 205.
Yeah, I found myself really going back and forth, really all rookie draft season on Taylor, Arroyo, and Ferguson. I like all of them to varying degrees for varying reasons. And I think especially I think second-round picks in general tend to get overvalued in Dynasty because a lot of the times we talk ourselves into, especially in the second half, which I know 205 is not in the back half of the second round, but that kind of mid-second round to back half, I feel like there are definitely gems you can find, but a lot of those guys miss every year. I look back on some of the second-round picks I've made over the years, and these were not reaches at the time. At least they weren't considered reaches. These were like consensus picks, and a lot of them don't pan out. So if I have a real need, which you do if Tyler Higbee is your starter and it's tight end premium, I do not see the 205 as like too high or risky. Like, even though I do like Besh and Higgins and Harris, I think it's totally justifiable to take the position that is highly valued in this format and that you really need.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
All right, let's quickly run through running backs and receivers. And I say quickly just because there's not really a ton of changes going on. There is one receiver you wanted to highlight. Before we get to that, let's get to the running backs, though. Anybody stand out to you here, Fitz, that's even really worth spending time on? We spent so much time on the guys at the top. We've spent so much time on the rookies and where they fit in. There just really isn't a lot of movement between this chart and the last one. Does anybody, stand out to you that's worth hitting on?
Yeah, I mean, one guy we should maybe talk about a little bit, Worm, is Rashee Rice, who we gave a boost to. And I'm looking in the chat right now, and Bunting has an interesting comment. Bunting says that I've always loved using the FantasyPros trade chart as a gauge against how the experts feel, or to gauge how the experts feel and pin that against the general market. So, yeah, I mean, that you will get a little bit of our opinion with the trade values here. But I think maybe Rashee Rice was a case where we sort of felt compelled to move things up based on the way the market is moving on him. And I know, like, I'm probably the holdout with Rashee Rice and maybe not valuing him quite as much as Debro and Erickson, but we did give him a 5-point value boost. He was the biggest mover in our trade value chart, I believe, at the wide receiver position. And it's just, I know there's the Xavier Worthy factor. And the fact that if you look and include the playoff games for the Chiefs, that in Xavier Worthy's last 8 games, he had 50 catches. So he was producing at a 100-catch-plus pace over the latter part of the season. And I know he was kind of doing that late in the season in the Rashee Rice role. Now Rice is going to be back in his old role, and Xavier Worthy is probably going to be more of a vertical receiver this year. But I still think Worthy is going to earn targets in that role and maybe prevent Rashee Rice from having the same sort of value he had before the injury last year and before he got hurt in week 4 or whatever. Rashee Rice was like wide receiver 2 in PPR scoring, maybe even wide receiver 1. I can't remember. One of those two. So anyway, like I do think Rashee Rice is going to be somewhat affected by the emergence of Xavier Worthy last season, but maybe, I don't know, maybe I was thinking I was undervaluing Rashee Rice, basically. And based on the way people are treating him in Dynasty and the way some of the trades I've seen in the leagues I'm in involving Rashee Rice, we had to give him a bump, I think, and get him into the top 20.
First of all, for everybody listening, no, you didn't mishear. I did say running backs, and then Fitz jumped us to Rashee Rice, who of course.
Oh, did I? I'm sorry about that, Worm. I thought you were just saying.
No, I'm just giving you a hard time.
Oh my.
No,
bad.
there really wasn't anybody on the running back side that had major moves this time around. So that was very fair to move ahead. I just was needling you a bit. I agree with Rice as a good player to highlight though, because he is among, and in fact, he might be number 1 on the list of guys that I would find toughest to rank right now, because there is such an interesting case to be made on the pro side, and to me, such a compelling case to be made on the con side. And it's not even 100% about Xavier Worthy, because I do think they can be used, very complementary of each other. It's just that there's so many different things, if you're painting the picture against Rice, that you could list. It's not any one thing. It's the possibility of this Worthy breakout, dipping into those targets. It's the fact that the offense has not been as prolific in the last couple of years. This is not a 1-year sample size anymore. This is a multi-year thing. And I know the Chiefs are talking about like they kind of want to come back with a vengeance here, but we don't know 100% that they will. It's coming off of a significant injury, and I never want to be the guy that is too optimistic about an injured player coming off, a really major operation. It's the fact that there is this kind of looming element of the legal issues, which appear to be fine for this year, but we're talking Dynasty, and who knows if and when that comes back around to hurt you, or if that's something that, he doesn't grow out of, or whatever it is. So having said all that, he was awesome. He looked like a league winner at the beginning of last year. Really, since the second half of his rookie season, he's looked like one of the best receivers in fantasy. So I totally see the case in both directions. Do you think he's 18th most valued right now? Really, he's tied for 16th with Travis Hunter and T. Higgins. Do you think that's the right spot for him in terms of if we're trying to incorporate not just your rankings, but the market value? I know you kind of hit on that a little at the beginning of talking about Rice. Does 18th sound right to you? I mean, some of the names ahead of him, I don't think you can really make a case, in my opinion, to move him up, certainly, like ahead of a T. Higgins, Travis Hunter, Tet McMillan, Garrett Wilson. Like, these are all guys that I definitely have ahead of Rice. Maybe you feel differently. But the guys behind him, I also don't know that there's a really strong case to move him down. It's a lot of like you're imagining the upside on Rome Odunze. Emeka Egbuka is a rookie. We haven't seen it yet. Devontae Smith is stuck as the wide receiver 2 in his own offense. Jordan Addison, same thing. Worthy's in that same offense. Zay Flowers, I think, is a little overrated on the fantasy side. So those are the several names right after Rice, which I don't know that there's a strong case to move him down. So maybe I'm kind of talking myself into 18. Maybe it's actually not that difficult to rank him, and 18 is just the right spot.
Yeah, I mean, I've got him at wide receiver 22. I'm lagging our.
So who are those names that are ahead of him then?
I have Addison ahead of him. Like, I think Addison's fantastic, but I know people are maybe reluctant to fully buy into Addison because he plays with Justin Jefferson and because we haven't seen J.J. McCarthy play in the NFL yet. I still have Odunze ahead of Rashee Rice. Yeah, Rice is ahead of him on our value chart. I do have Devontae Smith ahead of Rashee Rice, and I do have I actually have Xavier Worthy 1 spot ahead of Rashee Rice.
Okay.
And then I have Emeka Egbuka immediately behind Rashee Rice.
Okay. Yeah, I think maybe I'm not as high on Rice as like Debro, for example, and I think Erickson, but I think maybe I'm a little bit higher than you. In that case, I want to remind everybody about the Trade Analyzer. You can evaluate trades with confidence using FantasyPros Trade Analyzer, instantly see the impact of trades on your team, and get expert recommendations, whether you're making a 2-for-1 deal or swapping a couple draft picks for that stud who will help you win now. The Trade Analyzer will help you optimize your roster and make smarter decisions. Try the Trade Analyzer today at fantasypros.com/myplaybook and dominate your league. Fitz, thanks for joining as always. Thanks everybody for hopping on. We'll see you again next time.